Hello and welcome to the last day of MD and DI's Focus on Fundamentals course, Medical Device Testing Regulatory Updates, Trends and Changes, including FDA, ISO, and MDR, sponsored by Nelson Laboratories. I'm Chris Keach and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few brief announcements before we begin. First, this webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in our Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. Please note that we'll try to get to as many questions as we can during our Q&A at the end of the program. If we're unable to get to your question today, someone will get back to you after the program is over, and the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. Towards the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click on the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen or type your issue into the Q&A text area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. And now, on to today's class, MDR Effects on Medical Device Processing. Discussing today's topic from Nelson Laboratories is Emily Mitzel, Senior Manager of Technical Consulting and Senior Scientist at Nelson Labs. To learn more about our speaker, please visit the Bios widget. It's with great pleasure I now turn this special session over to Emily to begin. Emily, take it away.
Yes, hello. Thank you all for joining us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm pleased to be talking about MDR effects on cleaning and sterilization validations for reusable medical devices. Thank you for joining us today. Reusable devices come in many shapes, forms, complexities, and range from invasive patient use to non-patient contacting. The definition of a device even includes equipment and accessories that are located in a healthcare facility or used in home health. First of all, I want to go over the processing cycle specifically for critical medical devices. First, we start with the surgical procedure. Then there may be point-of-use processing. Devices are then transferred to the central processing area of the healthcare facility, and manual and automated cleaning, including thermal or any type of chemical disinfection, is then performed. The devices are then inspected to ensure that there are no residual soil on the devices, as well as any parts of the devices that could be non-functioning. The devices, or even the trays of devices at this point, would be then packaged, sterilized, and then stored for the subsequent use. Now, what do we validate in this process? We'll be answering this question throughout the webinar. Medical devices are marketed in the European Union are required to comply with a set of medical device directives called the Medical Devices Regulation, or MDR, for the CE marking and the marketing in Europe. Over the past decades, the bodies of MDRs in Europe has grown to include several documents that medical device manufacturers know well. These are the directives 2001-83-EC, 90-79-EC, and 93-42-EEC. The regulation numbers also include 178-2002 and 1223-2009. On May 25th, 2017, New Medical Device Regulation 2017-748 was published, which replaced the previous Medical Device Directive 93-42-EE. These regulations are enforceable May 2022, allowing for a 3-year transition period of up to May 2025, after which all devices, new or existing, must comply with the new medical device regulations. Devices that already have CE marking will be good until the CE mark expiration date, and then documentation must be resubmitted under the new medical device regulations during this 3-year transition. By May 2025, only medical devices conforming to the new MDRs will be allowed for market in Europe. Now we'll go over some of the kind of boring part of this presentation, but I want to make sure that we get through all of the definitions and so on that are very important for this type of processing of medical devices. So according to MDR, Article 2, Part 39, The process carried out on a used device in order to allow its safe reuse includes cleaning, disinfection, sterilization, and related procedures, as well as testing and restoring the technical function safety of the used device. Now, according to the German Medical Devices Law 314, the process of processing of medical devices intended to be used sterile or with low germ contamination after the use on a patient. The aim is to enable the new use of the actions of cleaning, disinfection, and or sterilization, including the necessary steps of testing and servicing for technical and functional safety. According to ISO 17664, that was republished in 2017, preparation of medical devices activity to prepare a new or used healthcare product for its intended use. And those are the current definitions of reusable medical devices. And now other national regulations apply. And the problem is for this information is that there's really no standard approach in the EU at this point. Now we'll go into some definitions from the previous Medical Device Directive. For reuse, the previous Medical Device Directive Annex 1, 13.6H specifies reuse of the device. If the device is reusable, information on the appropriate process to allow reuse, including cleaning, disinfection, packaging, and, where appropriate, the method of sterilization of the device to be re-sterilized, and any restriction on the number of reuses. Where devices are supplied with the intention that they are to be sterilized before use, the instructions for cleaning and sterilization must be such that, if correctly followed, the device will still comply with the regulations in Section 1. And a reusable surgical instrument is defined as an instrument intended for surgical use by cutting, drilling, sawing, scratching, scraping, clamping, etc., to any active medical device which can be reused after appropriate procedures have been carried out. Next, definitions specifically from the newly published medical device regulations include, when we're talking about a medical device, this is any instrument, apparatus, appliance, software, implant, reagent, and this goes on and on, for human beings intended for cleaning, disinfection, or sterilization of the devices according to Article 1, Section 4. And a reusable surgical instrument are these types of devices that are intended to be reused after appropriate procedures. Now, we'll get into this a little more, and I'll mention this later in the talk as well. But now we want to specify that an accessory for a medical device is intended for manufacturer to be used together with one or several particular medical devices. And this is also intended to be called a device at this point, all accessories. The definition for manufacturer is a legal, natural or legal person who manufactures or refurbishes a device or has a device designed, manufactured, or fully refurbished. And then there's a couple other definitions for fully refurbishing, as well as reprocessing is a process carried out on a used device in order to allow its safe reuse, including cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization. So these are all very specific definitions that can be found in the MDR that are very important for any type of justification associated with what needs to be done for compliance with MDR. So now let's look at the differences between the previous Medical Device Directive and the current Medical Device Regulation. The MDR is a new regulation and is about 4 times longer and contains 5 more annexes than its predecessor, the Medical Device Directive. There are significant changes in wording used in the MDR that requires companies to rationalize their entire device portfolios and perform a global impact assessment in order to implement the necessary changes to remain compliant. Annex 1, General Safety and Performance Requirements, identifies new conditions that will need to be addressed for most legacy devices, and existing products must be recertified in accordance with the new regulations. There is also more emphasis in the MDR regarding safety. The word safety appears 290 times in the MDR, and the MDD, by comparison, is only used 40 times. The MDR contains new classification for reusable surgical devices and requires notified body oversight. Also, the definition of a medical device has been broadened to include non-medical and cosmetic devices that were not previously regulated, and now some of these devices now require processing validations between patient use. Along with the cleaning instructions and associated validations, notified body assessment will also include areas such as disinfection, sterilization, and maintenance and functional testing. And this is according to Article 52 of the MDR. Manufacturers will need to generate and provide more in-depth clinical data to provide safety and performance claims, including tighter equivalency standards. Medical device manufacturers also will need to report all incidents, injuries, and deaths into the EU portal that will centralize relevant data so that patients will have access to more safety-related information. Reporting for these incidents that did not result in death or serious deterioration in health is moved to 15 days from 30 days. So you have a shorter time, medical device manufacturers have a shorter time of reporting these incidents. Medical device manufacturers also need to revisit core processes, including the quality assurance, risk management, and post-market expectations. These also require careful review, planning, and updating to re-implement in compliance with the new regulations. Associated with all the information I have provided in the previous slide, what we need to remember the most is that there is a no grandfathering provision. All currently approved medical devices on 2020 will have 3 years to recertify under the new rules. There is also an expanded definition of what is considered a medical device. Many devices that did not previously require certification now will require certification. We also need to keep in mind that there is a reclassification of devices according to risk, and Class 3 and implantable devices are among those with the significant changes. Annex 8 defines these classification rules. It also is important to note that increased requirements for certain classes of devices are also located in this document. Now when we look at the verbiage in the MDR specifically related to processing reusable devices, Annex 1, 23.4, Section N, states that if a device is reusable, information on the appropriate processes for allowing reuse, including cleaning, disinfection, packaging, and where appropriate, the validated method of re-sterilization is appropriate to the member states where the device is placed on the market. Information shall be provided to identify when the device should no longer be reused, for example, signs of material degradation or the maximum number of allowable reuses. Annex 1, Section 23.4, Section O states that an indication, if appropriate, that a medical device can be reused only if it is reconditioned under the responsibility of the manufacturer to comply with the general safety and performance requirements. Chapter 2, Section 11.2 states that where necessary, devices shall be designed to facilitate their safe cleaning, disinfection, and/or re-sterilization. Also, like I said already, reusable surgical instruments are now classified as Class 1R, and this is according to Annex 8, Chapter 3, 5.2, Rule number 6. And in the case of reusable surgical instruments, to the aspects related to the reuse of the device, in particular, cleaning, disinfection, sterilization, and maintenance and functionality testing of the related instructions for use needs to be performed. I've also included all of the specific parts of the MDR that is appropriate for all these different verbiages so that they're easy to look up. Devices that are reusable shall bear a UDI, unique device identification carrier on the device itself. The UDI carrier for the reusable devices that require cleaning, disinfection, sterilization, or refurbishing between uses shall be permanent and readable after each process performed to make the device ready for subsequent use throughout the intended lifetime of the device. and the UDI shall bear, if applicable, the restricted number of uses. So once this is in place, it'll be easier to define the number of reprocessing cycles that can occur on each device. I now want to re-emphasize that certifications of reusable devices must be completed before May 2020. Also, according to MDR Section 52, Section 7 and 7C, notified body involvement is limited to aspects relating to the reuse of the device. Cleaning, disinfection, sterilization, maintenance, and functional testing, and related instructions for use. Now I want to move into a few challenges that medical device manufacturers are now coming against. There are many reusable device processing parameters that are considered state-of-art requirements or only partially disclosed, so that this provides quite a challenge to medical device manufacturers. There are also some acknowledged banning of specific devices that have been deemed non-processable due to wear or contact of risk tissue, for example, cutting and scraping blades, drills, or components that wear off. There are also issues with biocompatibility of materials that may leach substances due to processing. Today's medical devices include many challenging geometries like lumens and also disassembly and reassembly that needs to be performed prior to and after the processing instructions. The performance test of the device also needs to be considered, and this also includes mechanical, electrical, chemical, or biological performances. Also included in this list of issues that medical device manufacturers state is that there has been historical lower surveillance on processing of reusable devices with less notified body involvement. This also, I also want to specify here too, is that the information that needs to be included in validation requirements is also not as specific as other industries such as biocompatibility. So that does make it very challenging to reusable medical device manufacturers because they now need to rationalize what they're doing in these validations. There is also historically a lack of technical documentation because it has not been necessary to include these devices in the medical device directive previously. Associated with this, there may be missing data on shelf life testing, including biocompatibility after full cycle processing. There is a definite lack of consistency in the IFU and descriptions of the cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization processes. This also includes aspects of the processing like water quality, detergents, disinfectants used, all the accessories that need to be used for these processes, and the specific parameters that need to be followed. Sometimes there is actually no validation of these processing parameters. So we just have instructions and IFUs that have not actually been validated. All right. So I want to go into the fact that if a manufacturer can only publish a process in the IFU if the process has been validated and all processes and all equipment recommended in the IFU needs to be specified according to ISO 17664, EN ISO 17665, EN ISO 11135, and EN ISO 11607. All of these standards need to be complied with when performing the validations for the processing instructions for a reusable medical device. All right, now we are actually getting into the fun part of this presentation and what you've probably all been waiting for. This is how to save cost, time, and comply with medical device regulation. We first need to determine family grouping, worst case device or devices, and then we need to adopt all these other devices into the cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization processes. Now, it's not as easy as it sounds, and it requires extremely robust justifications. missing a slide there. Missing one slide there. I'll just talk through it and then we'll move to the next slide. All right. To help with this justification, we can reference information in current standards and guidance documents that allow for this rationale. ISO 17664, republished in 2017, Section 4.3 states that if a manufacturer supplies a number of different medical devices that share common attributes, then validation studies may be performed as a product family. If this approach is taken, the medical device manufacturer shall demonstrate commonality between the different medical devices, and the validation studies shall address the worst case attributes of the product family. AMI TIR 12, published in 2010, helps to define master products by specifying to address the worst case features or attributes of the products in the family. It specifies to select a master product that constitutes a worst case challenge and will represent the product family. ISO 17664 ISO 16665-3, published in 2014 and then republished in 2016, details attributes to determine family groupings, which include design, material, and weight. There is also a specific classification of each attribute of the sterilization families that is included in this document. Also, ISO 11135 specifies that a product family is a collection of products determined to be similar or equivalent for a validation process. It also specifies that the review for product equivalence can be conducted within each product family or processing category. Alternatively, a worst-case product or representative member can be selected for the qualification study. So when we go into these, when we talk about determining worst-case devices and so on, I do want to also specify, like I did earlier in the talk, that all accessories need to be included as they are considered to be devices. So when all devices and accessories have been grouped into family and worst-case devices, or even worst-case trays of devices for sterilization validations, and all of that has been determined, those worst-case devices will then undergo validation testing. Then all devices deemed to be less challenging to clean, disinfect, or sterilize can be adopted under those validated parameters. So this is a real interesting part of grouping devices. There's different ways to group devices, and first I'll go over how to do grouping devices for cleaning validations. And to do that, we look at three aspects of these devices. We first want to look at the device used. Devices can be grouped by their function, use, and degree of patient contact based on intended use. Similarly, configured devices or parts used for generally the same purpose and that contact comparable amounts of human tissue, blood, mucus, etc. may be grouped together for a validation. We then look at the material type, since materials ranging from metal to ceramic to polymers, usually a mix of several materials and are located on different devices, and materials hold onto residue differently and therefore should be grouped accordingly. A titanium device requires different processing than a polymer device with silicon or other soft plastic parts. Another example is devices that are 3D printed represent unique considerations because they are typically very textured and porous and thus more likely to hold onto residue. The third way to determine grouping of devices is looking at size and challenge features, in which the considerations that are employed in this type of grouping include components and product design and size. And just to expand on these size and challenge features, we look at these that may be difficult for cleaning and may harbor organisms and organic material. And these parts of devices include braided cables, pliable materials, textured surfaces, hinges, springs, lumens, and lumens, specifically dead-ended lumens, and inaccessible areas of the device that are difficult to reach for cleaning. Here's an example of how we would choose a worst-case device for a cleaning validation. As you can see, this tray of devices will be used for the same surgical procedure. And now we have to choose the device which has the most challenging features to clean. So if we look at this tray of devices, it's probably kind of hard to see on your screen as there's 4 different levels of devices. But there's devices that include lumens, include ratcheting areas. There's also devices that may include some knurled areas, inaccessible areas, but there's also devices that will be very simple and easy to clean, like simple metal devices that don't have any challenging features. And so we have to look at every device and compare it to the others and determine which would be the worst case device for the cleaning validation. Here's a close-up of one of the trays. This is the top tray of the tray of devices, and the gold device that has a 1 on it is what would be determined as the worst case device, since it is a ratcheting handle that includes a dead end lumen, and it also includes some knurled area at the top part and a lot of inaccessible areas of the device. There are also challenges that include validation of very large devices. So, for example, on the left, we have what we look at is different touch points of the device and then comparing those touch points to determine the worst case area to test. Another example of this would be a duodenoscope that is tested for validation. And this would include testing different points, for example, the air-water channel, the suction channel, the control handle, and the distal tip. Now the difference is for these 2 devices, for a piece of equipment, we may be able to choose the worst case area of that device and adopt all the other parts of that device in that cleaning disinfection adoption. Now for scopes, current requirements require all the parts to be tested separately. So we need to test all the sites separately and have results for all of those sites. Now we look at different things when we look at family grouping for sterilization validations. We need to determine a worst case tray by looking at the whole weight of the tray, the mass of the tray, including the mass of each device, the complexity of each device, the volume to vent ratio, and the ability of the tray and all the devices to allow appropriate air removal and steam penetration. When we look at ISO 17664-2017, it gives very specific information regarding a validated method of manual cleaning, and it requires at least 1 validated automated cycle using a washer disinfector. It also includes adding information such as accessories, the chemical and the quantities of the chemicals that are used, the specific water quality of each step, any chemical residues that need to be tested. It also requires the specifications of temperature, concentration, and exposure times, and all techniques, including all the rinsing techniques. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on briefly as well is end-of-use testing. So this shows when a device is at the end of its life. There is specific information in the medical device regulation and also in the ISO 17664 and the FDA guidance document that was republished in 2017. The MDR states that information shall be provided to identify when the device should no longer be reused. For example, it would show signs of material degradation or the maximum number of allowable reuses. The ISO document specifies that the medical device manufacturer must determine if reprocessing leads to a degree of degradation that will limit the useful life. Medical device manufacturers must determine the number of reprocessing cycles or other indication of the end of its life. And then the FDA document has very similar verbiage as the ISO document does. Now the issue with this is that currently without a unique device identifier, it is very difficult for healthcare facilities to count the number of reprocessing cycles or uses of those devices. So at this point, medical device manufacturers normally specify verbiage that shows when the device is degraded enough to show that it's at the end of its life. Now going forward with the requirement of the unique device identification, that will allow healthcare facilities and thus medical device manufacturers to determine a number of reprocessing cycles that will show that the device is at the end of its life. Now I just want to reiterate some responsibilities for medical device manufacturers under the medical device regulation. Medical device manufacturers are responsible for ensuring cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization instructions are adequate and validated. All notified bodies will then review technical files, including the validations, to confirm that they comply with medical device regulation and are acceptable according to international standards and industry guidance. The medical device manufacturer should then conduct a gap analysis and perform appropriate validations. So when we perform a gap analysis, we want to review all technical files for current Class 1R devices. So this is all devices that will be reprocessed in a healthcare facility. We want to identify any missing information, any testing that does not currently meet regulatory requirements, and we need to identify product families, worst-case devices, and adoption of all other devices. What I really want to conclude on is that the time for Class 1R devices is virtually running out. Like I said before, there's going to be no grace period for Class 1R devices, and the current deadline is May 2020. Missing lifecycle laboratory simulations will be a bottleneck. So we want to make sure that if there's any type of validation work that needs to be performed, it is done now versus at the end of 2019. If missing in the current technical documentation, this will take time and laboratory resources. I just want to go over the summary of reprocessing, and we want to show that, first of all, we need to perform a full risk analysis that includes all justifications and how we are going to meet all regulatory requirements. And then we write the whole test plan, which includes the sample numbers that will be validated, all processing specifications, all residual testing that will be performed, and the acceptance criteria that will need to be met. After the testing is performed, then a conclusion is written, which includes all the results for the testing, interpretation of those results, and the final reports of all the testing. I have also included some references on our Nelson Laboratories website for cleaning validations for reusable medical devices, disinfection validations, and sterilization validations for all reusable medical devices. And as you can see in the references area of this webinar, is that there are many references regarding reprocessing of reusable devices. All right, I want to thank you for your time today, and I would like to hand it back over to Chris for a question and answer session.
All right, thank you, Emily, for a great presentation. And now, before we begin with today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey available on the right-hand side of your presentation window. If you close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking on the icon along the bottom of your screen. And thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in this survey allows us to better serve you. We're going to now move on to the question and answer portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in our Q&A session, just type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, type your question in, and then click Submit. Please note that we'll try to get to as many as we can here in the time that we have left. If we're unable to get to your question today, someone will get back to you after the program is over. So let's get started with some questions here for Emily. Emily, got quite a few coming in here. So our first one for you, how frequently do you need to redo the biocompatibility study when nothing has been changed?
Of course. So if when I want to specify on the biocompatibility study. So in processing reusable medical devices, the biocompatibility is performed after the cleaning portion of the validation to ensure that there are no cytotoxic residues of any cleaning processes or and also to make sure that there is no interaction between the cleaning processes and the device itself. And that goes the same as a disinfection validation. We want to ensure that the disinfectant or any processes or associated with the disinfection does not produce any cytotoxic effects on the device after those processes. So we test for any toxicity after the cleaning validation and after the disinfection validation. So if there's nothing that has changed with the device itself or with any type of chemicals that are associated, or chemicals or processes associated with the reprocessing of the devices, then there is no reason to repeat that testing.
All right, thank you, Emily. We have another question here for you that asks if the device is sterilizable and the sterilization process is validated, do you have to run disinfection validation as well?
Oh, well, that is a really good question, and that is up for a lot of discussion in our standards committee meetings. Even just this week, we had meetings on AAMI TIR 12, and we are trying to add some verbiage into that document specifying disinfection steps that may need to occur between the cleaning and sterilization processes, and how to validate that process. So like we're saying, for any device that has to go through a terminal sterilization process. So what I want to have you all consider is that we need to ensure that medical devices are safe to handle by healthcare personnel. So devices are cleaned, and in a lot of people's opinions, they need to be disinfected to ensure that there are no organisms that are still on the devices that could be detrimental for healthcare facility personnel to handle those devices and place them into trays and package them appropriately before the terminal sterilization process. It is also required in a lot of EU regulatory agencies, and is also required in 17664, specifying that any disinfection process located in the instructions for use needs to be validated. Hopefully I covered that question appropriately, but it's not necessarily required in all aspects, but that's a difficulty, like I was saying, in the reprocessing validations, is that there's not specific requirements for a lot of these at this point. What is necessary is to have a very robust justification and rationale of what is required for processing and why.
All right, well, we've got a sort of a tag on to that question here for you, Emily. When you're running this disinfection validation, can you incorporate combined cleaning and disinfection instructions into the disinfection validation protocol or not?
Yes, another great question. So it depends on the device itself. So right now we are writing a Part 2 version of ISO 17664 that is specific to non-critical devices that do not require sterilization. So what we are trying to place into that document is, so any devices that the cleaning and disinfection steps would be kind of considered to be kind of the same process and uses the same product, that those could be validated together. Right now there aren't any documentation or any standards or anything like that that allows for the cleaning and disinfection parameters to be validated together, and so that is a little tricky right now. But with proper justification, I believe that it can be justified and performed together.
All right, thank you, Emily. Another question here that asks, is there a set of guidelines to be used for the staff to clean than other staff to inspect MDs prior to and post-cleaning? For example, change of staff one for the other, or one versus the other.
I'm not sure what that means of change of staff. This all needs to be included in the medical device manufacturer's instructions for use for every device, and exactly how to process medical devices for cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization. It also needs to be specified on exactly how to inspect medical devices, whether it is with normal lighting conditions with a naked eye, or if it requires magnification, or even a borescope to inspect lumens of devices. So that really all needs to be included in the medical device manufacturer's instructions for use.
All right, thank you, Emily. We'll move on to another question here for you. Looks like we've got several more coming in here. So for a low-risk Class 1 medical device not designed for direct patient contact, do we really need to provide cleaning instruction in the IFU if this device can pass the sterilization validation without any prior cleaning step?
Oh, well, it is my understanding, and a lot of people in the medical device industry, is that cleaning is always necessary. Whether it is just a wipe down or some type of full cleaning, that devices, whether they are not patient contacting, can still have environmental contamination that needs to be at least wiped off of the devices prior to any type of microbiocidal activity, including disinfection or sterilization.
All right, this is another one following kind of in that same area. So what level of testing is required for an OR device that does not touch the patient, such as a monitor?
Yes, and that again is going to be, information on that is going to be published in the ISO 17664 Part 2 document, and that is still under a lot of scrutiny. Currently there is no separate acceptance criteria for critical devices, semi-critical or non-critical devices, or even non-critical devices that do not contact a patient. And so again, this really requires a lot of information of the equipment itself, how it's used in the OR, what kind of contamination would be placed on that device, if there's any cross-contamination between the physician or healthcare personnel and the patient, what kind of surgery is being performed, or what type of procedure. Yeah, I could go on and on about the information regarding what you need to look at for those types of devices. Current industry standard requires those devices to be cleaned and disinfected with a wipe that contains both cleaning and disinfection ingredients. So that is kind of current practice in healthcare facilities, and thus validated with cleaning and disinfection parameters.
All right, thank you, Emily. Another one here asks, what is considered a non-medical device and what is considered a cosmetic device?
Oh, that's a good question, and that's not something that I looked into very well. You know, a cosmetic device would be something that would be utilized in a cosmetic surgery, but that's different. You know, that'd be considered a medical device. So I think just areas that have not been fully regulated prior to now, and certain medical device manufacturers have been regulated more so than other industries, and so they're just including a lot of other areas of regulation.
All right, we'll move on to another question here for you, Emily. It says, what if your device is labeled for a single use only, but it's widely known that hospitals reuse that particular device?
Now, is this a manufacturer that has that device, I wonder? Let's see. So, of course, somebody should have validated some kind of instructions for that information. Now, the tricky part of reprocessing devices that were intended to be single-use is not only to ensure that those devices can be cleaned, disinfected, and sterilized appropriately between patient use, but many of those devices were not designed to be used again on another patient. So it's more the ability of the device to be functioning properly on that next procedure. So I think those are the biggest issues with that. If a healthcare facility is reprocessing these devices without instructions, then they could be in trouble with Joint Commission or something to that effect. Unfortunately, the U.S. FDA does not regulate that, and so it would really come down to if somebody would know this about a healthcare facility, maybe talking to the Joint Commission and specifying that this is an issue and so on.
All right, thank you, Emily. Another question here for you. This one says, what is the expectation for validating human factors during reprocessing?
Yes, great question. So US FDA has recently asked some medical device manufacturers to not only, well, first of all, validate those instructions for use in a third-party laboratory, but also then go into a healthcare facility and perform a study on human factors. So what that would look like is a manufacturer would go into a healthcare facility that would be ready for this type of work. They would perform training with the certain healthcare facility staff on how to appropriately process the medical device, which would include the cleaning, disinfection, and sterilization parameters. They would then have every single person that was trained perform those steps in front of a person that could watch that, and also make sure that they're doing things correctly and that there aren't any issues with any steps that are very difficult to perform or anything to that effect. So a whole study would need to be conducted regarding watching the healthcare professional personnel in performing all of these processing steps to ensure they are done correctly.
All right, thank you, Emily. We've got another question here for you that asks, do we require a complete technical file for Class IR, Class IM, and Class IS devices?
Yes, I have heard that regulatory agencies are requiring full files for all those classes of devices.
All right, thank you, Emily. And again, as a reminder to ask a question for our audience, just type your question into the Q&A text area or click on the Q&A icon. Type your question in, click the submit button, and we will get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. We've got another question here for you, Emily, that's a rather long one, but we'll try and make it swallowable, if you will. Okay. So we can state in the IFU what cleaning agents were used during validation, but how relevant is a cleaning agent residue testing when the manufacturer does not control what is used, and agents vary widely in different markets?
Yes, that is a question that I get very often. So when a device manufacturer asks me what cleaning agents, or specifically what detergent that they should use in their cleaning validation. So what we first need to look at is what detergent is compatible with a device. So that's the first thing we look at, and what contaminants are on that device after the surgical procedure to ensure that the detergent can fully remove those contaminants. We also look at where the device will be marketed. We want to make sure that any detergent that is validated will be readily available in healthcare facilities where the device is marketed. So those are all things that we look at when determining a detergent for a specific medical device. Now, when we talk about looking at cleaning agent residuals, what we want to do is we want to figure out, again, what detergent is appropriate for the device and the area that the device is marketed. We want to use that device or that detergent to validate that specific device. And we would ensure that all the acceptance criteria is met for cleaning, as well as any process residuals are removed fully. So in that case, we would look at mainly at a biocompatibility test called a minimal essential media test to ensure that the rinsing steps after the cleaning steps are enough to remove any detergent that is left on the device. Now, what we want to do then is specify that specific detergent in the instructions for use. Medical device manufacturers may state after that specific detergent type that the healthcare facility could use an equivalent detergent, but now that would be up to the healthcare facility to ensure that the detergent is equivalent, which is a very difficult thing this day and age with so many detergents on the market. And so I really think that, and what I've heard from other regulatory bodies, is that it's up to the manufacturer to choose an appropriate detergent, validate that detergent, specify that in their IFU, and then it is really up to the healthcare facility to ensure that they can utilize what is in the IFU.
All right, thank you, Emily. Looks like we have just a couple more questions here for you. The first one is, what standards should we use to establish acceptance criteria for cleaning and disinfection validation?
Well, acceptance criteria is another tricky part. That is something that we've been debating on. We actually just had a call for the ISO 15883 Part 5 document yesterday morning, and it was another area of contention between medical device manufacturers, US FDA, and being a part of the ISO 15883 document working group. I'm the US delegate for that working group. We have probably spent about 15 hours working on acceptance criteria with delegates from all around the world, including Germany, the UK, Australia, Japan, US, etc. And that's been a very tricky thing to figure out. Currently, there is acceptance criteria that the US FDA accepts in the AAMI document, AAMI TIR 30. That document is now being republished or rewritten, and it's going to be a standard. It's going to be ST98. That will also contain acceptance criteria for cleaning validation. Another document that has acceptance criteria is the draft document for ISO 15883 Part 5, and that will provide good information of the acceptance criteria and the references associated with that acceptance criteria, why it was chosen, and so on. So that'll be a good document when it comes out, hopefully in the next 6 months to a year, but I'm not really sure on that. There is a few parts of that we're still working on. So probably not a great answer. I wish that it was more defined at this time, but that is where we're at this point.
All right, thank you, Emily. Another question here for you asks, how would you validate equipment used in a healthcare facility?
Very good. Yeah, I think I covered a little bit of this information previously. So I think really we need to figure out what type of environmental contamination this equipment would have. And so there is a lot of questions that we would need to figure out with that. So first of all, we figure out all of that information, and then we can determine exactly what we need to do for cleaning and disinfection of these devices. Then we will need to determine what chemicals we want to use for those processes, and then validate those processes. At this point, we need to validate those processes separately, testing for cleaning with 2 residual endpoints, and for disinfection, claiming a low-level disinfection claim.
All right, thank you, Emily. A couple more questions came in here. So this one says, is it possible to validate the efficacy of a few disinfectants and publish a greater list of disinfectants that are just materially compatible to cover several markets, or can we only publish products that have been tested for efficacy?
Yes, these are all really great questions. This has been something I've been asked a lot recently as well. And there is no great answer on this because it is really up for interpretation on this. But what I recommend and what I've done for medical device manufacturers is to look at the chemicals of the specific disinfectants that they want to specify for this process. Now, if a disinfectant has one ingredient, we can compare that with the concentration of a disinfectant with the same ingredient, and that's probably easier to justify. When disinfectants have multiple ingredients of different concentrations, it's sometimes hard to know the interaction between those 2 or even 3, 4, and so on chemicals. And so that's a little bit more difficult to justify those interactions and specify those disinfectants. So I guess the answer is it is possible. It's sometimes easier with different chemicals, but with other chemicals it may be more difficult for that rationale. Anytime that this is performed, it just requires a great justification and information regarding all of the ingredients of those disinfectants and how those ingredients will compare with other ingredients and how they compare with the killing of microorganisms on a device.
All right, thank you, Emily. We have time for just one more question here. So our final question for you, can cleaning validation be used to support biocompatibility of a device? For example, a device made of a material with good biocompatibility history, like titanium alloy, and if the cleaning validation can ensure the residual processing material is within the acceptable limit, thus justifying not conducting testing on a finished device?
Well, I can see their point of that with a specific device like titanium that makes it could make a lot of sense. Now, for a cleaning validation to remove residual manufacturing material is different from a cleaning validation that's going to remove patient contamination. So I want to specify that for this type of cleaning validation for reusable medical devices, we want to contaminate the device with any type of patient contamination that would occur during the surgical procedure. And so that would be different from the biocompatibility of the device itself regarding a certain type of device that has a certain metallic like titanium. So I really believe that there needs to be testing conducted on the finished device to ensure that we are testing the finished device with the patient contacting contamination.
All right, well, thank you, Emily. That looks like all the time that we have for questions for today. I'd like to thank Emily for a great presentation and Q&A session. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been available to attend today's event. This webinar is copyright 2019 by Informa Markets. The presentation materials are owned by or copyright by Nelson Laboratories. The individual speaker is solely responsible for her content and opinions. I'm Chris Keach on behalf of Emily. We would like to thank you for attending this week's course.